We are in Judges, the 8th chapter. In fact, this is the very last chapter in the study of Gideon. We've got about 5 or 6 more lessons that we'll be looking at before we get to the end of the chapter. True or false? Gideon is winning the battle against Midian. True. What tribe was invited to the battle but was invited later rather than earlier? Ephraim, yes. And because they were invited later, Ephraim decided they're not going to fight, didn't they? They fought, didn't they? In fact, they did some amazing things, didn't they? What was one of the big things that they did in that battle? Oh yes, they canceled 2 of the princes, didn't they? One by the name of Oreb and another by the name of Zeb, yes. And not only did they capture them, they... Oh, yes, see, y'all get to the nasty stuff fast. See? Y'all just get to the nasty stuff fast. I heard somebody say, decapitated them. Somebody said, beheaded them, you know. Yeah, it wasn't put them to death. Oh, no, it's decapitate them. And then who do they bring the heads to? Gideon, and then they left pleasantly and they were glad that they had won the battle, didn't they? No, what did they do? Okay, yes, they argued with Gideon, didn't they? And they brought their case as to why he hadn't called them early to the battle. And Gideon dealt with that situation as a good leader, didn't he? What did he point them to? Point that they what? The way Gideon put it is that what you have done is greater than what I have done. And he put it in terms of his family, didn't he? Okay? The gleaning of the Ephraimites is better than the vintage of Gideon. Right? Gideon hadn't done anything in comparison, he says, to what you have done. You've slain 2 princes, you've killed them, you've cut off their flight to the waters. You have done much more than I have. Did that appease Ephraim? Yes. Folks, sometimes we're going to have internal struggles, aren't we? And sometimes we're going to have conflicts that go on within our own ranks. And it is up to the leaders to handle those conflicts appropriately to the best of their ability. Okay? And one of the ways to do that, and we noted that, is to open an individual's eyes to the entire picture, right? Ephraim was so focused on the fact that we weren't invited early that they couldn't see how much they had done for the nation of Israel in capturing and killing those 2 princes. And when they came to understand that, and when they really saw that what they had done was a great thing, immediately their anger, the Bible says, was abated. Okay? Now notice that immediately the battle continues, okay? And we're going to talk about that. Having calmed all of these conditions or these emotions of Ephraim, it was time for the battle to continue. But the battle was beginning to take a toll on his men, okay? It was beginning to, really, they were starting to put a strain on them. How long does a man have to go before he gets tired? Now, see, I figured the women would say, about an hour. Okay, that's what I thought you would say. They've been fighting for a long period of time, hadn't they? They are now well into the next day of battle, maybe even longer than that. And so they've been fighting quite a while. They fought all night long with no sleep. And so in order to get through the battle, they needed provisions, didn't they? And who better to go to for help than your own who? Than your own people. Your own brethren, and that's where he goes. Okay? Notice point number 2, the battle was taking its toll on his men. Twice we will learn that they will faint, and in those times help is needed. Others often have the provisions that are needed, don't they? In order to procure them, we have to what? Ask. I'm amazed how many people sometimes need help but won't what? But won't ask. And then they complain that the church didn't help. You know, how do you do that? You know, if you need help, what? Ask. And sometimes you just have to ask. But, notice point 3 there, sadly, not everyone asked will what? Will help. Now that's aggravating. And such will be the case for who? For Gideon. Notice the text. Resuming of the attack. The site of the crossing. And Gideon came to Jordan and passed over, he and 300 men that were with him. Folks, that unit stayed together, did they not? And now they were on the pursuit of someone, and we'll eventually learn exactly who that is. Where Gideon crossed, we are not exactly told. Now, folks, if you've got soldiers, and you've got horses, and you've got some provisions, where are you going to cross a river? Narrow and shallow, you hope, don't you? Okay? Now, folks, the Jordan River is not a wide river by any means. Okay? If you're looking 20, 30 feet across, that's not very far, is it? You know, most kids could throw a stone across that. How deep is the Jordan River? 4, 6, maybe 8 feet most of the time, unless it's at flood stage, and right now it's not. So Gideon would be trying to find as narrow and as shallow a place as he possibly could in order to cross. Do you think they knew where those crossings were? I bet you they did, okay? I bet you they knew exactly where the good crossings were to get across and easy. Let me ask you this. Is it easy to get 300 men across a river? Man, that'd be a tough situation. That's going to take a little bit of time, you know what? We used to go out on camping trips with the kids from the children's home, and we'd have to cross rivers sometime. And when I say cross a river, it was more like a stream, maybe up to your knees. And we'd have about 30 kids with us, 20 kids with us. And guess what? Sometime I thought we'd never get across. I'm serious. It'd take 2 hours. What are y'all doing? You know? It's like they were drunk or something. I thought you could never get them across. I can't imagine trying to get 300 men across the Jordan River. Okay? But they finally make it through. Finally make it through. Notice the shape of the men. Faint, yet what? Yet pursuing them. That little word faint is languid. We don't ever use that word, do we? Could you imagine what your kid would think comes in tired and wanting something to drink? But kid, you're looking a bit languid. You know? That kid would think he has to go to the hospital or something. Okay? That's why we don't talk like that. Faint, thirsty, weary. Brown, Driver, and Briggs. Faint, exhausted, and weary. I wrote down that there were probably several factors that took a toll on his men. Let me ask you something. When you are in anticipation of a battle, do your emotions run high? Yeah, folks, you're under a lot of stress and you're under a lot of strain until the battle begins, aren't you? And so you're immediately beginning to suck up a lot of energy out of your body. Then the fight begins, doesn't it? Usually is the initial conflict pretty strong and pretty difficult? Oh yeah, you know. Remember when the initial battle began, as far as the Midianites were concerned, they began even to kill one another, didn't they? And then the Israelites were involved in the killing as well. So there was a lot of physical effort taken in that. Notice point number 3 there. They had to pursue after the Midianites. Okay, I don't know about you, but if I have to ride very far on a horse, I get a little tired. Okay, I get a little strained. Don't you? It's not an easy task to do. Number 4, they had to cross the Jordan River. We're not told how much time has passed. We know that they started the battle when? Around 10 o'clock, a little bit after 10 o'clock that night. The entirety of the night has passed. They're probably well into the next day. Folks, that's a lot of time to go without food, is it not? You start going 10, 12, 14, 16 hours without food, that's a lot of time. Most of us can't hardly go 30 minutes without some food. Okay? But notice what the text says. They were faint, yet what? Yet pursuing them. Folks, sometimes when we read the Bible, we just read it over and we don't even think about what it's saying. Here's some men, they're faint, but yet they're still what? They're still fighting. And there's some lessons, therefore. There are times when physical needs must be set aside in order to what? To win the victory. Okay? There's sometimes, we get so caught up in our physical needs, don't we? That sometimes we fulfill those, and because we're taking that much time to fulfill those, we lose the battle. Well, these men knew we don't have that much time. And even though we're faint, even though we're struggling, even though we're hurting, we have to keep what? We've got to keep fighting if we're going to win this victory. Had they stopped, the enemy might have escaped, or they may have even what? Regrouped on them. Okay, folks, you can't let down when you start winning the victory. Point number 2, the request for help from Succoth. The request for help from Succoth. The solicitation for assistance is found in Judges 8 verse 5. And he saith unto the men of Succoth, Give, I pray you, loaves of bread unto the people that follow me, for they be faint. And I am pursuing after Zebah and Zalmunna, kings of Midian. Notice the community of Succoth. It says, the men of Succoth. Succoth was a town in the tribe of Gad, a tribe that was located in what we call the Transjordan River region. It's on the east side of the Jordan River. Okay, so the children of Israel have crossed the Jordan. They're now in what? They're now in Gad. Okay, they're now in a tribe of what? A tribe of Israel, aren't they? Folks, if you can count on anybody, you ought to be able to count on your brethren, hadn't you? Surely these individuals will help me. Was he asking them to go to battle? Ain't that something? Jump on your horse and follow after because we're trying to catch these 2 kings. Nope, that's not what he said. All he wanted was what? Just a little bread. That's all that he wanted. Unbelievable. Notice what he says. I pray you, loaves of bread unto the people that follow me. All he asked for was a plain, basic staple. Didn't he? Do most of the time we have at least a few little things in the house to keep us alive? Crackers, bread, a little milk, bottle of water or 2. Just a little something, right? And that's all he was asking for, folks. The request was simple. Bread would have helped these men gain some much-needed energy to continue the pursuit of the Midianites. Now, I want you to look at 2 lessons. As their leader, Gideon was concerned for the well-being of his what? Of his men. Okay? Guys, that's what a leader does. Okay? A leader has to be concerned about who? The totality of the group. Okay? The group usually is only concerned about who? Me. They don't care about the rest of the group, right? But a leader has to be concerned about everybody in that group. So there's a lesson that leaders need to understand. I've given you a reference down there, Saul in 1 Samuel chapter 14, verse 24. Saul was in pursuit of in fight with the Philistines. And during the course of that battle, here's what he tells the children of Israel. Don't you eat anything until what? Until the battle is won. Now there was one man who wasn't present when that order was given. Does anybody remember who it was? Jonathan, Saul's son. Okay? And Jonathan comes along and he sees this beehive and he sees this honey and he has a staff in his hand. He sticks that staff into that honey and he eats it, doesn't he? and regains his strength. But yet, he tries to give it to his people, and they say, oh no, we can't eat that stuff. Why? The king, Saul, has told us not to do that. And yet they were weary, and they were faint, and they were hurting. And you know what Jonathan said? Jonathan said that Saul has not used wisdom in this battle. In fact, he has harmed his people rather than what? Rather than help them. Folks, if you're hurting, if you're starving, if you're weary, if you're tired, guess what you can't do? You can't fight under those circumstances. Okay? Was Jonathan almost killed because of that? Oh yeah, his dad almost put him to death. Who rescued him? Anybody remember? The people did. The people came to Jonathan's aid and kept him from being killed on that particular day. Unbelievable. Notice the second lesson though. As the leader, Gideon did not put in a request for who? For himself. Listen to what the text says. Give, I pray you, loaves of bread unto the people that follow me. Isn't that something? You think Gideon may have been hungry? No, remember we said Gideon was one of the leaders who was right out there in the field of battle, was he not? In fact, he says, I'm going to start this whole shindig off, aren't I? Whatever I do, you do. And yet when it comes time to eat and the need of bread, he says, give it to who? Give it to my people. Give it to the men that follow me. I wonder if there was only enough for his 300 men, whether he would have been okay without having any. I bet he would, don't you? There's something special about leaders, aren't there? Folks, leaders are willing to sacrifice on behalf of whom? On behalf of their people. They will come up short. They are the ones who will suffer. They are the ones who will struggle. And they will satisfy the needs of their people before their own needs. Sometimes leaders have to understand that, don't they? And folks, good leaders do understand it. What's sickening, maybe I don't know, it's sickening and upsetting, is that most leaders in our world today, especially in our government, who do they provide for first? It's unbelievable, isn't it? You can become a millionaire numerous times over, and yet your people underneath you are struggling and hurting, aren't they? You've got people out on the streets that are homeless. You've got individuals who can't feed themselves. You've got mothers without milk formula, and yet they're living hound to hog. Folks, that's not the way leadership is supposed to be. Leadership ought to be the ones willing to suffer first and provide for their people. We've got it mixed up. Notice the cause for the request, for they be faint. And I am pursuing after Zebah and Salmunna, kings of Midian. Three things are noted. Number one, the men were what? They were exhausted, folks. That's what the word fainted means. They're faint, he says. They're exhausted. They're weary. They're tired. Number two, the men were engaged in the act of delivering Israel from oppression and bondage, weren't they? Who were they pursuing? The kings of Midian. Was this going to benefit Succoth and Penuel? Yeah. Folks, they were one of the 12 tribes of Israel, weren't they? The tribe of Gad. If they're delivered from Midian, Gad's delivered from Midian. So it's the winning of this battle is going to benefit them as well. Number three, the men were pursuing who? The kings of Midian. If we've already got the princes, right? We got the fighting men. We got the men who are the good generals out here in the field. Now if we can just get who? We get the kings. This battle is what? This battle's over. It's done. Are those three good reasons to feed these guys? They're your brethren that are faint. They're about to overthrow Midian, who is your oppressor. And if they can just get these kings, everything's going to be what? Wonderful. Hey boys, get them some bread. Is that what Succoth said? No. Look at the very next statement. And the princes of Succoth said, are the hands of Zebah and Salmunna now in thine hand? Wow. Go back up for just a minute. Folks, all of those three things should have pulled at the rationale and heartstrings of the city of Succoth. It seems that it would have been in their best interest to fill the need, wouldn't it? Point number one, doing good is always the what? It's the right thing to do, folks. Always. Trust in the Lord and do good, the Bible says. So shalt thou dwell in the land, and verily thou shalt be fed. Are we supposed to do good? Yes. As we have therefore opportunity, let us what? Do good unto all men, and especially who? Unto them that are of the household of faith. Notice this next point. If the men of Succoth loved their brethren, they would have what? They would have lended assistance. Now I want you to think about that. If they what? Love their brethren, they would have rendered assistance. If there be among you a poor man of one of thy brethren within any of thy gates in thy land, which the Lord thy God giveth thee, thou shalt not what? Harden thine heart, nor shut up thine hand from thy poor brother. But thou shalt open thine hand wide unto him, and shalt surely lend him sufficient for his need in that which he wanteth. Folks, that is a command of who? It's a command of God. Remember, we said that these men of Gideon are brethren, are they not? Here's a command of God that says what? If they are poor, if they are in need, what do? Give to them. Lend to them. Don't hold anything back. It's amazing how often we can hold back, isn't it? We have it, but we act like we don't. A lot of times. 1 John 3:17, but whoso hath this world's good and seeth his brother have need and shutteth up his bowels of compassion from him, how dwelleth the love of God in him? Wow. It's pretty potent, isn't it? Can't give an extra $10, but we can go out and eat a $50 meal. Oh, that's not good, is it? Unbelievable. Just think about that, folks. They failed to do good, and they failed to what? They failed to manifest love toward their brethren. That's pretty potent, isn't it? Notice what they say. And the princes of Succoth said, are the hands of Zebah and Zalmunna now in thine hand, that we should give bread unto thine army? Man. Who had they been under oppression of for 7 years? Midian. Okay? Midian. Folks, here's what we do a lot of times is before we make a decision, we wet our finger and we put our finger in the air to find out what? Which way the wind's blowing. And that is exactly what Succoth is doing right now. Do you know that? They're trying to make a decision on what? Who is going to win the battle? Right? And they put their bet on a certain person or persons, didn't they? Who'd they put their bet on? Oh yes, they put their bet on Midian. I mean, you look around and here's 300 tired, tattered, battered, hungry soldiers of Gideon that need food badly, right? And these 300 are going to win the battle? Are you kidding? I put my money on who? On Midian. Have you already caught those 2 kings? Nope, hadn't caught them yet. If you don't catch them, guess what? And they found out we helped you, it's going to be what? It's going to be bad, folks. It's going to be bad. Calvin DeLitch wrote this. In these words, there is not only an expression of cowardice or fear of vengeance which the Midianites might take when they returned upon those who had supported Gideon and his host, but contempt of the small force which Gideon had, as if it were impossible for him to accomplish anything at all against the foe. And in this contempt they manifested their utter want of confidence in who? In God. Wow. Here's the lesson. There are many individuals who, when they make their decisions are always based on what? Self-interest. And folks, that's what these guys are doing. What's in our best interest to do? If we help you and Midian wins, we're dead. What they fail to understand is what? If you don't help Gideon and you assist Midian, then you're what? Dead. It ain't good, right? So you have to make a decision. Notice Judges 8:7, the suffering predicted by Gideon. And Gideon said, therefore, when the Lord hath delivered Zebah and Zalmunna into mine hand, then will I tear your flesh with the thorns of the wilderness and briars. What are those kind of little bushes that are out in yards right now, and they're blooming, they're white, they're red, they're got thorns about that long on them? What are those things called? See them all over the beach. What are they? I don't know. But that's what they seem like they got on them. Okay? You back into one of them little babies and just one of them get you. Oh, some jokers hurt. Okay? Now notice what he says. When we win this battle, notice how he says it. What does he say? When the Lord hath delivered these kings into my hand. Had Gideon had a promise from God? Oh yes. Folks, Gideon knew exactly who's going to win. Didn't he? In fact, when God spoke to Gideon, He spoke, remember, in the what tense? The present tense. I have given into your hand, Midian. You've already won the battle, Gideon. All you've got to do is what? All you've got to do is fight. That's all you've got to do. But notice he says, when I win, I'll come back and bring what? Punishment. Then will I tear your flesh with the thorns of the wilderness and briars. That little word tear means to trample or thresh, to tread out, to thresh. Some of the threshing instruments that were made in those days were made of those long thorns from the bushes in the wilderness. Okay? They throw that stuff down on the ground and they would take those instruments and they'd do what? Thresh out that grain. Can you imagine? Gideon says, when I come back, I'm going to take those threshing instruments, and what am I going to do? I'm going to tear your flesh with it. Folks, he's promising them what? Not just punishment, but death itself. Okay? Not only would he inflict pain, he would also inflict punishment upon them. Can you imagine? You go to your brethren, they say what? No, we're not helping. So what do you have to do? You got to leave, don't you? Are they still weary? Are they still tired? Oh yes, still weary and tired. So they go to the very next city, and if you look on a map, Penuel is not very far from Succoth. Maybe a mile, 2 miles, at the most 3 miles away from Succoth. So they just go to the very next town. Surely these guys will help us. The stance taken by Penuel. He went up thence to Penuel, and spake unto them likewise. And the men of Penuel answered him as the men of Succoth had answered him. Well, there's just something about these Gadites, you know. Some families are just rough, aren't they? You know, I don't have any clue why they took these positions. But the men of Penuel answered Gideon just as Succoth did. Now notice the lesson. Well, let me make a statement real quick. The other day I made a post on Facebook and I was talking about defining words. You know how I tell you to do that all the time? You know, I'm big on this definition of words and how sometimes words in a text mean a lot and can make a lot of lessons there? Well, here's one of those instances. You can just, the men of Penuel, okay, you just pass over the meaning of the word. You don't look it up. You don't care. Guess what the name means? Facing God. We are the people who what? We are the people who face God. We are the individuals who what? Have a relationship with God. And yet, here are the people of God coming to the people who face God, asking for help for God, and what do? They turn their back. Not only on Gideon. Folks, they turn their back on who? On God. Think about that. It is possible for the people of God to turn against who? To turn against their God. What a lesson. What a lesson. Notice Gideon's response, Judges 8 verse 9. And he spake unto the men of Penuel, saying, when I come again in peace, I will break down this tower. Man. First point. When I come again in what? In peace. What does that mean? Huh? Yeah. When I have defeated Gideon, when I've put them down, when they're no longer our enemy, when they're no longer our oppressors, when I have restored peace to the nation of Israel, folks, there was no doubt in Gideon's mind he's going to what? He's going to win this battle. It's unbelievable. Should Gideon be a man of faith? Should he be counted as a man of faith? Oh yes. Took him a while to get there, didn't it? He had to be convinced. He had to have a lot of proof. But once he had his faith, there was no doubt he was going to win this battle. When I come again in peace, I will do what? I will tear down this tower. Now the question that we need to ask ourselves is, y'all are usually better than this. What'd you say? Ah, look at there. There he is. What's the tower? What did he say he was going to do to the men of Succoth? I'm going to tear your flesh with those thorns and briars from the wilderness. He doesn't say that to the men of Penuel. He says, I'm going to what? Tear down your tower. What does he mean? What does that mean? Nobody even looked it up. Did you? There's two different interpretations. Okay? Most likely, even though it was a small place, most likely they had a what around their city? They had a wall around their city. Folks, if you didn't have a wall around your city, you were vulnerable to attack easily, were you not? And on the different corners of the city would be a what? Would be a tower. And especially right beside the gate, wouldn't there? Okay? Most of the time, if an enemy is going to attack, where are they going to attack? They're going to attack at the most vulnerable spot, aren't they? And guess where that was? That's the gate. It's the one thing that opens easier than anything else. When you're looking at 5, 6, 7, 8 feet walls, those are hard to penetrate, aren't they? Takes a lot of catapults, takes a lot of hammering to get through 8 feet of wall. So if we can just bust the gate, then we got it made. Guess what every city did? They built a tall tower in order to see who? To see the approach of the enemy. Folks, if you can take the tower, then you can take the what? You can take the city. Okay? So what he was saying is, I'm going to come down and tear down the tower, because the tower represented the what? Represented the entirety of the city. Okay? Now there's another interpretation. Okay? Calendar Letch suggests that it may refer to the palace inside the city. We're going to take your tower. We're going to take the thing that you put your what in? Your faith and your trust and your confidence in. We come in, I'm going to tear down the palace in the city. And folks, you tear down the palace, you've destroyed the what? You've destroyed the city, haven't you? Man. Notice point C there, though. Undoubtedly, it was something in which the men of Penuel put their pride and their trust, didn't they? Folks, it was something that he was threatening these individuals with on this particular occasion. Conclusion. In times of warfare, we think we can trust to our brethren for assistance, especially if that assistance is relatively simple. Don't we? Let me ask you something. When we're hurting and we're in need of assistance, is it hard to go to your brethren to ask for help? Isn't that something? That's the hardest thing to do, isn't it? In fact, we'll almost ask anybody else for help before we go to our brethren, right? Whether it's, somebody said, embarrassment, pride, whatever it is. Okay, we just don't want to go there. So that's one bad thing. Folks, what did Jesus say? Ask and it shall be given you. Seek and you shall find. Knock and the door shall be open. Sometimes we just need to ask, don't we? Okay? But here's the sad part, and this may be one of the reasons some don't ask, is because sometimes you ask and the brethren say, no. Ugh. Now see, that's bad too, isn't it? Chateau said, worse. Oh, how true that is. Okay? How true that is. Why would brethren say no? They what? Oh, they want to see you do bad. Now that's a bad heart. Boy, I ain't helping you. Why not? I want to see you do bad. Why don't we help? What's that? Y'all got to speak up. You can't mumble. They don't want to get involved. The church doesn't want to get involved. Brethren don't want to get involved. Okay? If I help, I'll never what? Get my money back. You know? There's a written rule in my head, and it's this. If I ever help somebody, I never expect it back. Now, I may get it back, but I never what? I never expect it back. Because if I expect it back and I never get it back, then guess what happens to me? I'm upset, aren't I? Okay? No. I've got it. I can help. Here you are. If I don't get it back, guess what I can keep doing? I can keep living. Can't you? A few dollars ain't going to normally kill me. Okay? It's just not going to hurt me that badly. But sometimes the church just doesn't want to help. It's hard for the church to make decisions about help. Did you know that? It's hard. Who do you help? Do you help everybody? Right? Once people start finding out that the church does help, guess what? Then everybody shows up at the doorstep wanting help. Right? Very seldom does the church ever get it back. You know, I've known about 2 or 3 people over the course of 40 years in preaching that have paid the church back for assistance that they were given. Okay? Took a few months, but they finally gave it back. That's pretty good stuff, isn't it? It doesn't happen very often, so that's another reason. Yeah. You will. Absolutely. And sometimes that's the position that we take, don't we? There's also a lot of programs available today, especially in our nation, that we think they need to go to in order to get the help rather than what? Coming to us. Folks, the dirtiest work in the church, as far as I'm concerned, is benevolence. That is the most difficult, hard decisions that you can make. You know it? And sometimes you have to say what? No. And you don't really want to, but you have to. True or false? Church budgets only go so deep. Yeah. There's only so much money churches have. Just like you and your family, there's only a certain amount of money that we have to help. So sometimes it's tough. But if we can help and we're in a position to help, the Bible says what? Do good and help. And will God always reward that? Folks, that's something else we need to remember, right? You may never get it back here, but guess what? God will reward it over there, won't He? I was an hungered, and you gave me meat. I was thirsty, and you gave me drink. I was a stranger, and you took me in. Naked, and you clothed me. Sick, and you came unto me. In prison, and ye visited me, the Lord says. And that's the reason that He says what? Enter thou in to the joy of thy Lord. And if we don't do that, it may be the very reason we hear the words what? Depart from me, ye cursed, into everlasting fire, prepared for the devil and his angels. Chateau? Yeah, to me, it sounded like they weighed the battle, you know, and they looked, like you said, they looked at 300 versus. Remember, we said there could have been 100,000 plus troops, right? And even though they were on the run, they were running back to where? They were running back to Midian. If these guys can get regrouped, if these guys can take a stand, there's no way these 300 are going to be victorious. So they weighed it in the balance, and they chose the enemy over the people of God. And, well, that's scary. Oh, yes, always. Sarah? Yep. Yep. Well, when you ask that, there were only 4 tribes initially called to the battle. Okay, there were only 4 tribes, and so we definitely know that, and neither one of these tribes were called, were they? Ephraim nor Gad were called, and we know Ephraim was definitely upset, weren't they? Because they weren't called. So her point may very well be a valid point. Gad wasn't called to the battle, so I'm not going to what? So I'm not going to help. It's in chapter 7. I'd have to go back and look. There's, let's see, Manasseh, Asher, I'm trying to think, Zebulun, and one other. They were the 4 northern tribes, okay, that were stationed up at the top where the Midianites would have pursued them. I can't think of the 4th one, but it's no. No, the first 32,000 came from 4 tribes. That's all. Okay, but Gad was not a part of that, and so your point is still well taken. If they weren't called, and now they're being asked for help, absolutely, and it may have made them aggravated. It's a valid point. I want you to notice point number C in the conclusion there, folks. Gideon would now have to pursue the enemy, famished and weary. The battle would be won, but it would be much more difficult for the 300 men, wouldn't it? Okay? Folks, sometimes you just got to keep what? You just got to keep fighting. Even when things are bad, even when things are not good, even when people aren't helping you, you just got to keep what? Fighting the battle. And if you keep fighting the battle, guess what? God's promised the victory, hasn't He? Good stuff. Thank you, thank you.